Story 1. The scratching didn't stop when Noah's fingers did. He lay on his side, breath held, hands still. The bed kept whispering, skin against cotton, right beside him, as if something had learned his small trick and was trying it on. Noah had grown up on an island that wore history like weather. Always there, even when you didn't look. Long before bridges, the sea iced over in winter, and, people said, the living and the dead alike crossed when they could. His childhood home sat above a marshy cove where, according to neighbours, travellers once camped and ferried their lost. The schools were built where graves had already been. He spent too many nights awake anyway. Asthma, croup, the weight in the chest that stole the sound and made parents into watchmen. His mother would sit beside the bed. It started when he was 6, maybe 7. The surrender of the body while the mind stayed lit. He would wake, pinned to the mattress, eyes open to the room he knew, unable to command even a finger. And then, the other presence would arrive. Sometimes it stood in the doorway, a tall figure in a brimmed hat, cut out of the hall's grey. He learned not to blink at it too long. But the worst came closer, crawled closer. On the worst nights, she knelt on his chest, an old woman with hair like storm-tangled rope and eyes he tried not to fixate on, because if he fixed on them, they fixed on him. Her wait was deliberate, patient. The first time, he thought, this is just a picture my brain is making. Then she leaned in, an airless language ribboned into his ear. Syllables without vowels, a chant meant for bones, not for hearing. He tried to scream. He learned he couldn't. He learned to shut his eyes and aim for blackout. Sleep became negotiations. He taught himself tricks. Wiggle a toe and ride the movement up. Pretend to laugh at her. Keep eyes closed so the picture had nowhere to land. It worked. Until the nights it didn't. There was the night the Hat Man lingered at the footboard, while Noah fought the paralysis like a net. The closet shelving gave way in a crash, toys and clothes thundering down. The doorway was empty when he snapped free. His father barreled in, wide awake, because the sound had been real. "You okay?" he asked, looking from the wrecked closet to Noah's open eyes. Noah nodded. He was awake. He was always awake for the worst parts. Years made him practical. He left the hall light on sometimes. He grew used to the island's other noises, the child's cry across the marsh that no one found, the woman's wail that some neighbour swore was a fox, the boot-thick thread of unseen travellers moving through the yard. His mother heard them too and simply put a hand on his back, the way mothers do when there's nothing to fix. He learned to call it sleep paralysis, a name that explained the freeze and the pictures. Last night, the old weight returned. Not as a woman yet, but as a law pressed into his muscles. He woke mid-breath and found he could not finish it. The ceiling blurred, the corner of the room hauled black. The hallway waited like a mouth. Wiggle the fingers, he told himself. Start small. His fingertips dragged along the sheets. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Each scrape a signal he still lived inside here. The body caught and released. The pressure loosened. He felt the switch flip somewhere he couldn't name, and the current came back. He stopped moving. Relief. He waited for the quiet that meant it was over. But the bed kept scratching. At first, it was perfect mimicry. Scratch, pause, scratch. A hand he couldn't see testing a trick it had just learned. He opened his eyes. Nothing beside him, just the dip in the mattress that wasn't there a moment before. The sound stopped the moment he looked. Not faded. Stopped. As if caught. He didn't move. He kept his eyes open and counted his heartbeats. He thought of the old woman's chant, its consonants without air. He thought of the once graves under the school and the way the children, himself included, had climbed the wall and touched forbidden ground, like it proved something. His fingers twitched. The mimic didn't return. He knows what the books say. He's read the brain maps, the REM atonia charts, the names for images that aren't there. Most nights, the explanation is enough. He laughs, he wiggles, he rolls over, and the net slips. But there are also other pieces. The crash of a closet that brought his father running. The marsh that shapes voices out of wind. The shared hearing of footsteps moving through a dark yard with no one in it. A mother's hand steady on a child's back because something is passing by. And now, last night's copycat. He can't make the bed scratch by itself simply by knowing the word for why he couldn't move. He doesn't plan to test it. He won't sleep on his side tonight. He won't leave his hand where something can learn it. Morning found the sheet smothered in a neat band where his fingers had moved, and one extra wrinkle, narrow as a fingernail, running parallel to his own. Story 2. At 2:03 a.m., the bedroom handle pressed down by itself. Elise watched the lever sink, quick, decisive, as if a hand on the other side had grown impatient with doors. The bed gave its small, familiar rock beneath her. Buddy's collar chimed once in the dark. Her grandmother snored softly across the hall. Human sound, steady and simple. Everything else waited. When Elise moved in with Nora, the house felt like a held breath. It was small enough to memorize. A pocket of rooms stitched by a short hallway. A single bathroom, 2 bedrooms. An old piano against the wall. The hallway mirror was a massive inherited thing. Beveled edges, foxed with faint silver freckles. Nailed into plaster so firmly it seemed part of the house. At first, nothing happened. Teenager life filled the square footage. Homework, late-night chats. If the bed's frame gave a tiny sway when she lay on it, she blamed the old floorboards. When it rocked again side to side while she lay perfectly still, she blamed herself. Imagination, nerves. Then a friend slept over, and in the morning said, "Your bed moves," with no drama at all. And the word moves stayed in the room after they left. One night, between midnight and 4, Elise sat at the desktop. No headphones, no music. Breath tickled her from behind. Warm, aimed. She turned and found nothing but the doorway. An hour later, it returned. This time, she didn't turn. Her body filled with chills. A different night, the living room recliner folded around her and the laptop went dark. She let her eyes close. Buddy, her dog, curled on the couch arm within reach, lifted his head in the same instant Elise heard a woman's voice in the kitchen. Not a word exactly, the shape of a voice. Buddy stood, throated low bark, and padded to the kitchen doorway. He planted himself, staring into the corner between the stove and the counter, muscles tight, tiny growls tapping out of his chest. Elise turned on the light. Empty corner, ordinary night. Buddy barked twice more and, like some decision had been made, relaxed and returned to the couch. Elise gathered the laptop like a shield and slept in her room. The bed rocked as if something outside the house were passing by. In daylight after school, the hallway mirror sometimes held a bolt. Dark, shapeless. The way a spilled drop twists into patterns if you look from the corner of your eye. Each time she tried to look straight at it, it slipped. She'd flick her gaze to what the mirror was reflecting, the bathroom door, the paint, the piano's glossy lid, and found nothing there. Just the sense of movement in the glass itself. At night, a single piano key would press as gently as a thought. Not a tune, a test. Elise asked Nora about the furniture. The mirror had come with the house. The piano belonged to a previous tenant, a music teacher, who left it when she, moved on. A neighbour, Mr. Alvarez, watering the shared strip of grass one afternoon, added that the teacher lived alone most of her life. He had a story. A fall in the hallway sometime before Elise was born. Bones heal, he said, shrugging. But houses keep schedules. By the time Dylan moved in, Elise had learned to treat the house like a place with habits. He was kind, practical, and did not believe any of it. They shared the bedroom across from Nora's. Saturdays were for cheap takeout and the smallest TV they could balance on a dresser. At 2 a.m. on a weeknight, a knock struck their door. Not a creak, not a settling noise. A knock. They froze. Nora's snore came steady from across the hall, innocent and proof of nothing. Elise opened the door to an empty hall. The mirror watched her open the door and offered only back herself. She closed it and sat on the bed. Dylan clicked off the TV. "It's the building," he said, and then, as the words left his mouth, the handle next to him pushed down and popped back up with a quick, sure motion. Someone testing entry and finding it locked. They looked at one another like strangers caught in the same coincidence. Dylan opened the door because somebody had to. The hall was a rectangle of nothing. Front and back doors locked, windows latched. They went to bed and lay awake. Days later, Dylan returned from the bathroom and said, almost amused, "Twice someone sighed at me in the hall." He did a small imitation, a long, tired breath, not theatrical, not filmed, just human. Elise nodded. She'd heard it too. Once together, later near the kitchen. They both turned in the same second toward that corner by the stove where Buddy had once posted himself like a sentry. Elise started asking questions, small ones. Nora dug out a cardboard folder of closing papers. The mirror was listed with other fixtures, attached, as though the house would be hurt if someone tried to remove it. The piano, an itemized afterthought. Mr. Alvarez produced a name for the teacher. He remembered how she'd played scales with her window open in the spring. Always alone, he said again, not unkindly. Always listening. Elise ran a finger along the mirror's bevel. Bits of silvering had gone to dust in the corners. When you stood in the hall at night, your reflection doubled in a thin seam where the glass had been mended once upon a time. She wondered who had mended it, and for whom. Living with a house that pays attention teaches you small rules. Elise stopped crossing the mirror after midnight. She kept the bedroom door latch not for safety, locks meant little, but for the courtesy of making whatever wanted in choose to enter. She started a sleep log in the notes app on her phone. Piano key at 1:17, sigh at 3:40, knock at 2:02, handle at 2:03. Dylan laughed at the log and then began adding to it. His entries shorter and more careful. The fatigue changed their speech. Little frictions drew blood because they were both already wounded by lack of sleep. Elise found herself looking at Dylan and thinking the oddest thought. He believes me now. As if belief were a victory instead of a truce with something you can't fix. The house's habits were one thing. Elise's sleep became another. The first time the Old Hag arrived, it was not in the house with Nora, but later, after Elise moved in with Dylan somewhere else. She woke pinned to the mattress, chest pressed, hair braided too tightly to pull. A face leaned over her own, a pale, thin, almost sketched face with hair like wet string and eyes washed white around a tight, dark pupil. The mouth opened wider than breath could use. Hands she could not see closed where breath should go. She came up screaming, hairline damp, fingers hurting from how they'd curled to fight. Dylan grabbed her shoulders, saying her name and then saying it again. She could not say, "It felt like the house found me." She could only say she was okay. Another night, the thing on the floor had no head. It was a body in a spider crouch, hands and feet bearing weight, poised as if deciding between 4 directions at once. It gathered itself and jumped. She awoke with a scream. Another night, something lay beside her in the shape of a person, pale as a linen face, long hair spilled toward her on the pillow. 1 second, scream, awake. Dylan's hand again. "You had a dream," he said. In her log, Elise started a second section for the terrors. She noticed their timing. They came after arguments, after long days, after days that were nothing at all but tired. They also came after good days, which ruined the trick of making sense of them. What made sense? When she slept away from Dylan, once at Nora's to help with a doctor's appointment, the terrors came back, but softer. At Nora's, the sigh returned near the bedroom like a neighbor leaning on their horn far away. At Nora's, a single piano key touched itself down in the dark. The mirror kept its own silence unless she looked too long at the mended seam. She kept thinking of the music teacher, alone in a long hallway of years, the metronome of midnight and morning ticking inside thin walls. One late weekend, Dylan fell asleep with the TV's light pulsing low. Elise woke to the weight on her chest again, but this time She also heard the sound of a door handle pressing down somewhere else in the apartment. She couldn't move. She couldn't look. The room tightened like a held breath, just as the old house had done, and the sound of the door settled back into its frame. Her mind did a strange thing. It laughed. Of course you'd bring your own door with you, she thought at the hag or at herself. She could not tell which was which anymore. The laugh cracked the paralysis. She pulled in air so greedily it almost hurt. Elise stood in the hall of the apartment alone. She faced the bathroom and let herself listen, truly listen, to the way the buildings breathe. Pipes pinged. The refrigerator ticked. Upstairs, someone dropped a shoe. No sigh, no knock. She lowered her eyes and saw her own bare feet in the weak blue light, and thought of the other hallway, the other mirror. She walked back to bed, lay down, and closed her eyes. In the dark behind her lids, the hallway mirror presented itself with perfect clarity. Silvering, freckled, seemed like a thin-healed scar. And in it, a shadow that had never been a person, only a movement. The shadow held its ground. It would be there long after she left. Elise opened her eyes. Dylan shifted and mumbled her name. She watched his face in the slow TV light and felt love and fear and the kind of clarity you only pay for by staying awake too long. The next morning, she told him she was going back to Nora's for a while. It wasn't a fight. It was the end of one. Elise left. The terrors stopped. She slept and woke and did not scream. She returned to the small house to help Nora sort a closet and, on a Tuesday, found herself alone, standing before the mirror as daylight thinned. In the glass, only Elise. No blot, no movement. The seam sat where it always sat, proof of mending. Behind her, the piano waited with its full board shut. She touched the mirror's edge and felt the small vibration of a truck passing blocks away travel through wall, frame, glass, bone. That night, at 2:02, the lever handle across from Nora's room pressed down and then sprang back up. Nora snored steadily, human and simple. Buddy lifted his head and, after a second, sat it back down. Elise rolled onto her side, and the bed gave its little rock. Houses keep schedules, Mr. Alvarez had said. People keep their own. Elise sleeps now with her back to the mirror whenever she visits. In the morning, she finds on the notes app that her last entry remains. 2:03, handle. 2:04, nothing. She hasn't added a new line in a long time. Still, when she passes a mirror in any narrow hallway, she never looks too long. Story 3. The TV couldn't have been snow. The satellite doesn't make snow. Cole sat up, the room grainy with static, and watched the mirror across from his bed. That's where he saw her. Pale, hair like wet rope, crawling down the wall toward him. Back when night felt like a challenge, Cole and his friends decided they were ghost hunters. Someone found an address, the remains of a burned house out past the last streetlight. A story, told in whispers, unverified and maybe untrue, said a woman lived there alone, dug into strange practices, and that something terrible happened with local kids and a fire. That was about the shape of it. Cole already lived with a baseline of weird. In his mum's place, the bedroom door opened onto a hallway the dog wouldn't cross. Shadow shapes drifted the room some nights like people in a hurry. Rex, who loved everything, planted himself at the threshold and growled at the ceiling, at the closet, at nothing. Cole learned to set the TV sleep timer because the blue light made the dark feel less crowded. They went to the country at midnight with cell phones, as if reception made them brave. The house was a black rectangle of char and moon. They stared in the footprint where a living room used to be and asked the air for a name. What came back on a recording wasn't language so much as intent. A voice not shaped for lungs. They ran for the car because that's what you do when you get what you asked for. Jess, last in line, said she felt a breath on her neck. She didn't scream, she just moved. They laughed about it all the way home because laughter is a lid that fits most nights. Cole slipped into his room, the TV to time out in a few hours, and felt the little relief of a plan working. He fell asleep with the premium channel playing itself quiet. He woke to snow, the old analog kind. Digital TVs don't do that, he thought. A stupid practical idea that only made the wrongness louder. From under the hiss came a sound, like someone trying to yell through a hand-pressed pillow. Muffled moaning, shaped by panic more than breath. Cole's skin prickled in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He didn't want to turn his head, but he turned it anyway. The mirror opposite the bed held his room, and then, like a picture developing, held something else. She was already halfway down the wall near the ceiling. A woman the color of paper left in the rain. Hair stringing from her skull. Dress the kind of dirty that doesn't come from work. Not falling, crawling. Palms and the flats of her feet on paint, moving in short, decisive jerks as if gravity were a rumor. Cole's breath tripped. The TV snapped off. Darkness arrived like a hand over his face. He smacked the light and flooded the room with ordinary wattage. Nothing on the wall, nothing in the mirror. No sound but the cooling pop of the TV and his own too loud inhale. He sat there, electric with adrenaline, and kept the light on until morning. In the shower, he reached behind his shoulder to scrub and hissed at the sting. In the mirror, 3 thin scratches ran the center of his back in a straight line, as if a careful fingertip had practiced there. Not deep, not bleeding, not anything. He checked the room like a rational person checks a room. Window latched, closet ordinary, TV input set exactly where he'd left it before sleep. Satellite TV doesn't make snow, he thought again. Rex still refused the doorway. That night, when Cole stopped at the threshold, the dog stared into the room and growled the lower register reserved for things he didn't understand and didn't want to. Cole told his friends he was done hunting. He didn't say why. He didn't know how to explain that some places aren't places you go to. Story 4. In the hollowed house beneath the desert sun, Mara felt the pull before she saw the woman, an invisible hand closing around her breath, asking nothing and taking everything. It began on an ordinary afternoon. when sleep came too quickly. In the dream, she was younger, 16, maybe 17, wandering a canyon where the rock rose like ruined cathedrals. Friends moved with her, faceless in a way dream companions are, present but without edges. They found a door cut into a boulder and stepped inside. Upstairs, the rooms were carved from stone, shelves grown out of walls, a table fused to the floor. A narrow stair led down. She met the woman in the cellar, the kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself so much as rewire your nerves to make room. Long black hair, dark attentive eyes, a dress that moved like water in shadow. The sight arrived with its own instructions. Draw nearer. Say yes. Worship. No, Mara thought, or tried to. That isn't me. The thought had the weight of a twig against a river. The closer she came, the more relief she felt. And the relief terrified her. She stopped. The moment she did, the woman's face changed. Beauty drained like a color pulled from fabric. Hair matted and lengthened. Skin dried and tightened over sharpness. A mouth thinned with age and appetite. The room bent around the change as if it had been waiting. They screamed at the same time. Mara from the shock, the woman from a deeper, older place. And the hag moved with both hands reaching. Friends thundered down the steps in the way dreams provide knowledge without explanation. Mara knew what would end it, break the thing's hold, and consign it to fire. They wrestled its shape apart and dragged what remained across the floor into the old stone hearth. The flames rose without smoke. The hag's voice did not plead. It scolded, furious at the insults of resistance. Then the shape unraveled to nothing. No ash, no stain, only heat cooling on the stone. They climbed out into the open air along a cliffside path. The desert yawned below, light beginning to fail. Mara let herself breathe just once. Across the distance on a far ridge, the hag stood whole again. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The pull returned, clean, irresistible. The message was simpler now and absolutely calm. You belong to me. Mara understood as if someone had spoken into her ear that the pursuit would not end. Not tomorrow, not ever. The dream had chosen a corridor with no doors. The path narrowed at the cliff's edge. The drop was clean black glass. There's only one way out, thought arrived. Not afraid, just true. Mara stepped forward. She woke upright, heart slamming, hands crawled at the sheets as if she'd grabbed air and pulled it up with her. The room was ordinary and bright, in the way afternoon is bright. But her body kept the memory. The narrow instant before falling, the look on the hag's face as composure broke, and something ancient learned the word, no. She never met the woman again. Still, years later, the dream sits in her like a sealed jar. She's read the words for it. Nightmare symbolism, ordinary brainstorm. They tidy the edges. They don't explain why the house had a cellar that felt older than architecture. They don't explain beauty that behaves like hunger. They don't explain the quiet certainty that sometimes, in dreams, refusing is the only door. When she thinks of the desert now, she never goes downstairs.